all of those things you consider smart devices. Nowadays, you're seeing that like Google and Amazon, they're creating one device that is designed to control your light bulb, your microwave, your coffee maker, right? So all of those things, all technology-based things really have a foundation in programming.
On the ExpertsConnect podcast, we have thought-provoking conversations with top-performing experts on topics that matter to you. With ExpertsConnect, you'll uncover fascinating facts and gain the necessary skills you'll need to improve all aspects of your life. Hi, Trevor. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. And how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Welcome to the ExpertsConnect podcast. And today we're going to be talking about why programming matters. So, Trevor, can you please describe your background?
Well, I'm Trevoir Williams. I'm a Jamaican and I have over 10 years experience in the IT industry. I started programming really when I started attending the Northern Caribbean University in 2006. So I guess you can gauge my age right there. But I did a computer science degree, and then I went on to do a similar degree, but at the master's level with Columbus State University. I have taught at over 3 tertiary institutions in Jamaica, and more recently, I've been creating online courses, putting out more content out there. And pretty much I've worked in the education industry, shipping and banking industries across Jamaica, all with IT roles, of course. But right now I'm overseas applying my trade in a banking institution.
Very impressive, Trevor. And tell us, why does programming matter and why is it important specifically to this generation?
Well, when you think about all the technology, all of the smartphones, laptops, the operating systems, even the televisions and the fridges, all of those things you consider smart devices. Nowadays, you're seeing that like Google and Amazon, they're creating one device that is designed to control your light bulb, your microwave, your coffee maker, right? So all of those things, all technology-based things really have a foundation in programming, because what makes them smart is the programming, right? There are people who sat down and wrote these lines of code that look like hieroglyphics to somebody who probably doesn't really understand it, at first sight. But there's somebody who sat down, wrote these lines of code to instruct these devices on how they can behave, what they can do, what they can't do. So programming is very important in this generation. The smarter the devices get, is the more programming considerations that go into their creation.
Yeah, so it's important to this generation, but can you give us more examples about how it has impacted our society?
Well, throughout the ages, going back to maybe the first tool, right? You think about technology. So things like simple machines. I learned in school you have simple machines, the wheel, the pulley, and then you have complex machines, which basically are combinations of these simple machines, right? So we went from horse-pulled carriages to cars, and then we moved from cars to cars that drive themselves, right? So as technology evolves, programming is introduced and heightens the experience each time as the technology evolves, right? Because then you move from a car with just a motor to a car that when you turn it on, you have a sensor telling you that your oil is low. That's programming, right? And then, like I said, we move from that to a car that can drive itself. That's another level of programming, that the car is making decisions in real time. And a car is just one example. You could look at the evolution of a cell phone, from the house phone that was just a straight analog signal to a smartphone that is capable of being your personal assistant, checking your weight, your temperature, everything in one setting. That so programming, generally speaking, is enhancing how I would just say enhancing our quality of life, and how easy it is for us to access certain things along the way when we're using these devices or interacting with our own creations.
That's so true. Do you remember the times in Jamaica when we used to use the call box?
No, I don't think I was call box time. I'm sorry. I remember house phone with the buttons. That's where I started off, and the big cell phone.
Okay, Mr. Trevoir. And tell us now, because you're obviously much younger than I am, according to your vague memory. What inspired you to become a computer programmer?
Well, actually, I was supposed to be a doctor. Um, I don't know. I'm just going to say that everybody in at least my generation would have been told be a doctor or a lawyer, which isn't the worst advice ever. I mean, our
Yeah.
parents always wanted what was best for us, right? So I grew up thinking in the back of my mind, I am going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a doctor. And then somewhere along, maybe grade 10, maybe grade 9 in going into grade 10, I started to work a bit more with computers. Actually got my first computer when I was probably about 12 years old. And to my family's surprise, I was able to assemble it. It came in parts and I was able to actually put it together and plug up all the peripherals and everything. And, just doing that, I loved it, and using the computer, figuring little things out. I just fell in love with computers. So by the time it was around that time in high school where we would all choose our subjects to know which career, along the path that we wanted. Of course, I chose the sciences because being a doctor is still my priority, but then I chose IT also. And right then and there, I fell in love with it. My first programming teacher, I'm going to drop names if that's okay, but Miss Camille Hoskins, if she's out there listening, I'm giving her kudos. She was my first programming teacher. And then, we did our school leaving exams. So from high school to go to college or university, I got one of the best grades in IT for my group. And that interest to want to be a doctor kind of diminished also, because then you're thinking about how much longer after this you're going to take to actually be a doctor versus going and doing a degree in IT. And it was something that I loved, right? So I made that shift to IT then and there. And then I had a good mentor to follow, Miss Hoskins. I'm going to name drop again, Mr. Housen Smith, right? He provided a solid foundation in introduction to programming. And from there, like throughout university, I was just moving level to level, loving this field, loving everything about it. And really and truly, that's how I got started. Like after getting that degree in IT, I just continued. And thankfully, my career has brought me to places where I was able to excel and express myself in the career even more.
That's very impressive, Trevor. And tell us, how did you learn to code?
Well, so my first language was QBasic, taught by Miss Hoskins for our school leaving exam, CSEC IT. And then to follow that up, I would have learned C++ in university. So yes, going to school was a fundamental part of me learning to program, right? But then outside of the school setting, outside of the classroom setting where Mr. Smith or any of the other lecturers, and I'm calling Mr. Smith because he taught me most of the foundational programming courses, right? So outside of being in class like that, I put in a lot of practice behind the scenes. And I had friends, now colleagues, who were equally as zealous about it as I was. So it was, being in the right crowd, of course, helped, because then we could, iron sharpen iron. So we could all bounce ideas off each other, teach each other, learn from each other, and everything. So outside of class sessions, we were sitting down in a corner, just writing something, just practicing, just we want to learn a new language. We say, okay, we're learning C++ now. Let's go and look for a language that we don't know and try and do the same assignment that we got in class in this other language. And while I'm not saying that you need to learn every language, what I'm saying is that that kind of zeal and that kind of approach help to open up our horizons and scope towards what is possible in programming, how, applications can get developed. So really and truly, I would just say a lot of practice went in, and that helped to sharpen the skills that we're already getting in the classroom setting.
That's very good. And from what I gathered, based on what you answered from the previous question as well as this question, was you definitely need to have a good mentor. You need to really have passion for programming. And as well, you need to have group support as well as practice. Practice, practice, practice.
Practice, practice, practice. Yeah.
So tell me now as we go, because we want to inspire our audience who would like to become computer programmers. So what skills do we need, those of us who are aspiring to take a computer programming career, in order to be successful?
All right. Well, so like you pointed out or singled out, a good mentor is always good to have, and a passion. Now, a good mentor may not always readily be available. Let's just say I was fortunate enough to attend a school that had, in addition to the one lecture I've mentioned, a suite of good lecturers, good mentors who could guide you, right? But then that's not always the possibility for some people. Of course, having a passion definitely helps, because if you're not passionate about it, you probably won't feel the drive and the need to do it, and you won't put in the work that is required, right? Practice, practice, practice. I always say practice makes permanent. I don't believe in perfection, but practice makes permanent, right? Because when you do things and do it the right way, then you're going to want to do things the right way all the time, right? But then there are other little things that kind of go in, of course, like you're now asking, what else would an individual need to be a successful programmer? Well, one, I would say humility, right? So humility goes a far way, especially in this field, because no matter, and maybe not especially in this field, in anything in life, whatever you think you're good at, there's always somebody out there better than you. There's always somebody you can learn something from. And the more humble you are, then the more open you are to receiving correction, the more open you are to learning new things, and the more you will grow altogether, right? So you may not have a stand-in mentor, but then you may meet somebody who knows something you don't know, and then you get the correction and you align yourself accordingly, and you can grow from that experience. Generally speaking, also, good problem solving skills, that's good to have, because programming is all about solving a problem, right? As the personal assistant app on the phone was created because somebody had a problem. Somebody had a problem where they needed a way to track their schedule, but the laptop was too big. So somebody wrote the program to solve a problem, right? So problem solving skills, the ability to detect a deficiency in a process, in a procedure, in some bit of interaction with some device or anything. I'm running out of words right there, but the ability to detect a deficiency and then develop a solution for it, that is good to have, because then that is what programming is all about. Another very important thing that I have realized through my career, at least, is that it's good to be a good team player and have good communication skills. I used to pride myself on the fact or notion that I was antisocial and I'm not a people person, and that's why I chose computers, because I didn't like people. Probably that attitude probably got me through school. And then, I had colleagues or classmates, now colleagues, at the time, who shared a similar mindset. So, it wasn't like they weren't people, they were just other computers, so it was bearable. But then when I started working in an office where you're not only surrounded by IT people, right? And you're not only talking to IT people, because the manager of the department might not be an IT person, he might be a business person. And then you need to be able to communicate with him about IT related matters in a way that he or she can understand, right? You might end up working with other team members who are not IT people, like especially at one of the financial institutions that I worked at. I was the IT resource. I had a business analyst who didn't want to hear anything about IT. I had a project manager who worse didn't want to hear anything about IT, but I had to sit in meetings and interact with them and communicate with them. So communication skills are very important. And from day one, I had learned that if you cannot express what you want to do, then you're not going to do a very good job writing a program for it. So if you can't verbalize it, then you're probably not going to do a good job implementing it. So those are my top, or those would be my tips for anybody who is thinking, what do I need to put in place to have a successful career, or at least have a good career, get a good start. Those things need to be in place.
Yeah, sound advice, Trevoir. And what are some of the best ways for someone who knows nothing about programming, wasn't exposed to it in school, etc., and they want to start? What are some of the best ways to start learning programming?
So there are a number of online resources available to you. Programming, I must admit, is very multifaceted. Well, IT in general is multifaceted, and then programming is multifaceted again, right? So there are quite a few things, and when you probably think about it, it may seem daunting, it may seem overwhelming when you see all the technologies listed, and if you research it, you're just being bombarded with everybody's, let's say, opinion or perspective of where you need to start, and then you might get confused, right? But then I would encourage a person to firstly think about what aspect do they like. There are certain let me backtrack. There are certain fundamentals that I would say put in place. One, learn web development, right? And web development resources are readily available on the internet. You can go to W3 Schools. You have other websites like Code Academy with free resources, free courses, everything that you can just take your time and get acclimatized to web development technologies. And those namely would be HTML, CSS, and then JavaScript. After you learn web development and you understand the certain core concepts, how writing this hieroglyphic looking thing gets translated into something, a different visual representation on the computer, then that kind of sets a foundation now for you to understand other languages and how those interact with the computer. So then, once again, there are online resources. So you can go to Code Academy, you can go to Udemy, you can go to W3 Schools, and you'll see a number of resources there. And potentially, or more than likely, they actually do, they have learning paths for you. So you can start from scratch, and they will take you step by step and help you to progress from technology to technology in a way that is not convoluted or seemingly confusing.
Yeah, great advice. And why did you say that people should learn web development first? What's the rationale behind it?
Well, I'm recommending that because the immediate reward of learning web development is far more encouraging than, in my book, it's far more encouraging than learning C and C++. And the reason I say in my book, I've seen this over the years with my students, because introduction to web development is one of the courses that I teach on a regular basis. And generally speaking, when they get to introduction to web development, they would have already been learning C and C++. Now, C and C++, they are good foundations, help you to rationalize that logical flow of programming and so on, if this, then that problem solving thing. But then it's really just a black and white screen you're seeing. So you're going to write 19 lines of this hieroglyphic looking thing, then press F5 and see one line on a black and white screen, right? So I can appreciate from the students' perspective that it feels mundane. Now, the reason I would say learn web development is that when you write the hieroglyphic looking code and then you see a visual representation of something that you did, and then you can shape it and mold it and form it, I think it builds your confidence as a newcomer, because then you're going to want to try new things. And when you try something new, you see an immediate reward, an immediate response to whatever change you made. So that is one of the reasons I would say that. Another reason, though, would be that you can't go wrong with web development career-wise. Everybody wants a website. I mean, internally, applications now are being built using web technologies more than desktop development. And then if you understand web development, then you can almost easily transition to mobile development also. And in the grand scheme of things, now websites are being designed to run on mobile devices. So that's even a more universal reach. So that's another aspect to why I would say start with web development. I think it's easy enough to just get in the groove, start writing the code, seeing the immediate effect of what you've written, and you can grow and grow and grow. And then when the program becomes more complex now, like maybe when a user clicks the button to say submit on a form, now you need to do something. Then you can start understanding how you transport data from one part to the other. And then those higher languages like C, C++, PHP, to be more specific in the web context, would start coming into play.
Okay, so my next question would have been, what programming languages are in demand? So is it that PHP? What other languages are in demand?
All right. Well, in demand is rather relative. In demand is relative to the industry, and it is relative to the company also. Generally speaking, once again, everybody wants to know that you're proficient in web development. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, those are fundamental. All right. So those are the web development.
What about React?
Languages. Right. So React, and then you have React, you have Vue, and you have Angular. Right. So those are building on top of JavaScript, but then you can't get to those if you don't understand the basic JavaScript. Right. But those are definitely in demand. They call that the mean stack, MERN stack, or Maven stack, where you would have MongoDB, what did I say? Mean, Express, Angular, and then Node.js, and then the A can become R for React or V for Vue. But the thing is that yes, those JavaScript frameworks are in demand. There are a lot of people asking for them. There are people asking for Python developers. There are people asking for Ruby on Rails, .NET framework / .NET Core that is very popular. Personally, all of my career has been centered around .NET based environments. So that's where I would say my highest level of proficiency is. All right. But then that being said, there are a number of languages that are in demand. So if you have the basics for web, you're on a good trajectory. You can level up to the JavaScript stack, the Mean, the MERN, the Maven, C#, that's good. And C# is almost exclusively used for .NET programming. Python is good, and especially good for data scientists. And then it would be in your best interest also to be proficient with database development or design. So when we talk about database, we talk about Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, PostgreSQL, or NoSQL, which is a code or a general category under which MongoDB or Cosmos DB, Redis server, those all fall underneath NoSQL. So it's good to have a good understanding of let's say, the three levels or three major facets of any application. So languages aside, I always encourage persons to understand the concepts, because you have people who rush into learning languages and they say they know the language, but they're missing out on fundamental concepts that help them to build good software. Good software is relative, but you know, stable and well built, well architected software. Of course, from day one, you're not going to just jump out the gate and be the best. Of course, it takes time to build up, but don't forsake the fundamental concepts. Understand UI. So when I say HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, that's where the UI comes in. How to make the user interface. Sorry, I said UI. UI is short for user interface. How to make the user interface, how to make it attractive to users, how to style it, everything like that. HTML, CSS, and then interactivity with it. You know, when you hover over the button, it vibrates, pulsates, those things, JavaScript. So that's the UI part of it. Then you have to understand the logic, which is when somebody puts in input and presses submit, what logic runs in the background, what business rules are being executed in the background. Now, those business rules, that logic comes about from understanding languages like the C, the C++, the C sharp, PHP, Python, Java, right? And to a further extent, JavaScript, if we're talking about the React and Node JS based stacks, right? So you want to understand that part. And then finally, you want to understand databases, because this data needs to get stored somewhere. Every time you go online and you click submit or use an application and you click submit, that data is being stored somewhere. You need to understand how to build that data store properly, right? So that you can later on use it and use it into perpetuity, right? So those are the three parts of an application that I would encourage somebody to learn. The language that you're going to learn, yes, you could focus on the on-demand ones, but I'm not going to say one language is better than the other. Each language has its merits. Each situation is different, right? You wouldn't go to a place that uses .NET technology and tell them that they should throw that away, just use PHP. Why use PHP? Right? They're both going to pretty much do the same thing. But then if the situation calls for PHP, then fine. Right. So that is really what I would encourage somebody. Understand those facets of application development. What they call them is full stack development. When you understand all three of those, you become a full stack developer. So understand what it takes to be a full stack developer. And then over time, you can develop your own preference towards any one of these languages based on your experiences and the demand.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing more. And from your experience working in the computer programming industry or software development industry, would you say there is a shortage of female software developers?
I would I would say that there is a shortage. I must say that the ratio in all of my jobs so far has always been skewed to the male, and heavily skewed at that, right? So I would say that, you know, we could use, at least in my experiences, we could use a few more females. That would be nice.
You?
But no, well, a few more, as in just, yeah, we want more, right? But then I've also realized that the female programmers are, when they're good, they're very good, right? You can have good developers in general, but then when you have a good female developer, it's almost like you have a very good developer. So there, I don't know if it's necessarily a bad thing that there's a shortage, because, you know, when we have a good female developer, we still have an excellent team even with one, because she tends to be very reliable and very capable either way. So I mean, yes, we could use more, and I would love to have more females interested in the field, of course. But then, I mean, only time will tell if that will really happen.
I think we just need to address the gender gap. We need to invite more females to pursue careers in technology, specifically software development. Also, probably we need to break the notion, because from what I have experienced, given that I also studied computer science, was most of the girls in my year at UE were just afraid of coding, programming.
And
So,
then there's that. Yeah. 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 There is that. That is true, because I can recall that if we had 10 girls in the year group, in an IT year group, maybe three make it through to the end with the programming, right? And for whatever reason, because I don't know if it's necessarily fair to say that they fear it more than men do, because if we have 50 men, maybe 30 make it through, right? But then you have more men to start with, and then
yeah,
more men making it through than the. So there is that. But then at the end of the day, I think it probably has to do with interest. Maybe if it can be marketed, like an IT career can be marketed in a way that makes it seem more gender neutral, one,
yeah.
and two, more inviting to anyone, then maybe the uptake from the young ladies will be greater, as you have suggested.
Yeah, I agree. So we need to have even more female role models in tech careers, I believe also.
Right.
Yeah,
That is fair.
yeah. And what does programming look like in the future?
That's a very interesting question.
I was reading in one of these tech magazines, I don't remember, but what they were saying is that they were even thinking that maybe you won't have programmers in the future, or there was another conversation that everybody going forward will have to program. What's your take on this?
I think that's a mixed statement, or at least I have mixed feelings about that statement. I must say that one, programming languages are evolving in a way that they are trying to make what were mundane tasks much easier to grasp.
Mm-hmm.
So, like when I was learning programming, there are certain things that I had to do to get a certain result that, I had to probably write 10 lines. Now I can do it in one line, because somebody figured out that these 10 lines, everybody has to do these 10 lines all the time. So let me just do it one time, give them one line. So then somebody coming along would not necessarily appreciate the effort it took me to accomplish the same thing back when I started versus when they started, or they start, sorry. And then by virtue of that, the getting into programming may become a bit more appeasing, because now it gets a bit easier, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? So then maybe more people will get programming knowledge. I know that there are various programs around the world, at least, where they're encouraging programming as early as elementary school, right? I know Lego, they do it, robotics, and even those little things to pique the curiosity of children and help them to get into programming a bit more. So there are signs that it will be easier to get into programming, quote unquote, easier, right? But then on the flip side, or building on top of that, rather, there are what you call low, as in LOW, low code and no code development platforms being developed, where you can actually build applications through dragging and dropping things. So there's no hieroglyphics anymore. So then it makes it easier for somebody who doesn't necessarily want to sit down and learn all of that to actually create a program that does or solves the problem that they would like to solve. So that would make it easier now for a business owner, somebody, to just develop a solution. And something as old and as prevalent as, say, WordPress has been providing that service for years, because I mentioned the web technologies, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Not everybody wants to sit down and learn all of that, but they want a website. So WordPress and similar content management systems have made it easy to build websites, build beautiful websites without the person having to look at one line of CSS, HTML, or JavaScript. So I don't necessarily know if everybody will be a programmer versus will need to program in the future. Because then again, like I said, they're finding ways to encapsulate mundane tasks, and with increasing technology, I mean, I've never had to take up my smartphone and write any program specifically for it. And I have a Note 9, the Note 20 is out, and I know that some of the things that are manual on this are now automated on that one. So that even takes away from my need to understand the technology and do certain things. So as technology advances, your need to understand the technology and the underlying systems diminishes. So I think it's a mixed statement. Context will determine everything, of course.
Yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Yeah. So, Trevor, what advice do you have for people who want to pursue a career in computer programming?
Advice for persons who want to, I don't know, I think that's one of the hardest questions
Why?
to answer. It's like, where do you start? So as I said earlier, I think everything that you want to do starts with the passion.
Yes.
Right. So if I don't want you to, or you or anybody else, to decide that they want to be a programmer because, oh, I don't have anything else to do, let me just try IT. Or because a lot of the times that's what happens. And then I've seen students, I've had to deal with students like that, they didn't know what they wanted to do, so they just chose IT, and then they just weren't passionate about it, and they just didn't make it through the program. Right. So that's my first bit. Be passionate, be interested. I'm not saying you must be passionate where you're going to starve yourself because you're writing code, but be interested and know that this is something you really want to do. And then that attitude will determine your altitude and your aptitude in the field. Right. So that is probably the first bit of advice. Be interested. And then I would reiterate, be humble, right? Be humble, be willing to accept correction, because that's what programming is all about. You'll do something and there's almost always a better way to do it than the way you did it the first time, or somebody else will come along and know how to do it better than the way you did it. Be humble and willing to accept the corrections and learn. Don't be afraid to ask for help. That is one fundamental thing. And I don't know if that is unique to maybe being a programmer. I think that's just unique to learning. And on a personal note, I have been, I'm always saying I'm learning to play the piano, right? I've been playing for a few years now, but every time somebody asks me, I'm always saying, oh, I'm learning. I guess that's my way of lowering their expectations of me. So if I don't perform up to scratch like them, then it's not that big of a deal. And a part of what has stunted my growth, because I know I've higher heights to reach, but a part of what has stunted my growth is that I've been afraid to ask for help. Right. So that is one thing I did not necessarily have a problem with when I was learning to program, though. I would always go into my professor's, my lecturer's office and say, sir, this isn't working. Miss, this isn't working. Please help me with this. Please help me with that. I didn't do that with music. So I'm just running that parallel to show you that, to advance as a student and in your career, don't be afraid to ask for help. When you don't know something, it's better admit you don't know and find it out. Don't pretend to know and then inherently limit yourself, right? And then finally, practice. So practice. Running another parallel. Practice means in terms of music, learning new songs. The more songs I learn, the more ways I find to play the notes, the more patterns I realize I can play the notes and so on. So when you practice in programming, it's about finding new things to build. And it doesn't even have to be new. I'm not saying you must go there and design a new Facebook or a new Instagram. What I'm saying is that, you're learning, a calculator, you learned how to do math, design a calculator, right? Yes, there are 1,500 calculators, but nobody ever learned how to design a wheel without first reinventing the wheel that was already there. So reinvent something, and by doing that, you hone your skills and learn more and more ways to express yourself in programming and how to develop different solutions. All right, so those are the things that I would advise somebody willing to take up a career in programming. Just be humble, seek out the information. If at all possible, find a mentor. And if not, don't be afraid to ask somebody who you think should know for help, and practice.
Yeah, very beautiful advice, great advice. And just to add, because I can imagine that people in our audience would probably be self studying or self learning. So, one of the resources they could leverage is online forums like Stack Overflow when they're asking for help, because, or even utilizing the resources on Geek for Geeks or W3 Schools. So, yeah, those are some of the things that they could do. Thank you so much for sharing such great advice and sharing your own experience and also being vulnerable. I like the part when you said that, you could be better at something, but one of the things that stunted your growth was, just not asking for help. And that's important in this context of learning to program. You definitely need help. So yes, how can people reach you, Trevor? Because I know you have a lot of courses on Udemy. How can people reach you?
Well, I am available on almost all social media platforms, and I just use my name, Trevoir Williams.
Okay.
You can see me on my website, www.trevorwilliams.com, and most of my courses, well, all of my courses are actually listed there. So you can contact me at any point, and my email address is there. So if anybody's out there who needs, just to contact me to have a conversation or anything, feel free to reach out.
Okay. Thanks for sharing and thanks for being on the show. Cheers.
Thank you for having me.